that, my dear viewers, was the view of the Himalayas. But in Singapore, there are no mountains like that, just drab weather. And that, the all-new 2024 Royal Enfield Himalayan 450. I'm your host, RP, the relatively damp, and welcome back to my channel. Royal Enfield Singapore has lent me the bike behind me for a week and a half so that I can put it through its paces and share with you what I've learned about its capabilities.
One week later.
The all-new 2024 Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 now sports a 452cc liquid-cooled single-cylinder engine with overhead camshafts that puts out 40 horsepower at 8,000 RPM and 40 Newton meters of torque at 5,500 RPM. The 24 model has vastly improved performance over the original 411 Himalayan, providing a 25% increase in power based on torque figures alone for a mere 10% increase in displacement. I do think though that while the Himalayan 450 does not technically have a narrow power band, it feels like there is a pretty sharp climb in power delivery from idling at roughly 1000 plus RPM till its peak at 5500 RPM, before it tapers down rather gradually past 8000 RPM. This lack of low-end grunt kind of makes it a slight challenge to inexperienced riders, especially if trying to attempt a climb off-road. However, around the top end, 100 to 120 km per hour is pretty much an effortless baseline to the Himalayan's engine. You get a 6-speed transmission whereby the gearing tends to be pretty standard all around with tight spacing between the gears, meaning shifts tend to be seamless as the gears overlap each other a lot along the RPM range. Final drive ratio sits at roughly 3.13 to 1, a wee bit short as well in its own right. When it comes to handling and agility on a motorcycle, they tend to boil down to 3 big factors, being suspension settings, weight distribution, and tires. You get front and rear Showa suspension with about 200mm of travel each that runs pretty soft with my 75kg frame. Most of the Himalayan's weight sits up pretty high on the bike as well, and the stock CEAT tires have a pretty flat profile. The wheelbase is also an incredibly long 1510mm. There are pros and cons to this setup. I personally feel that at cruising speeds, the Himalayan is one of the most stable bikes in a straight line that I can ride on in this displacement category. You also get a pair of solid Biber brakes with ABS front and back, and they have very solid braking with relatively light finger pulls. When it comes to off-road performance, I was initially a bit hesitant, thinking it would be as difficult to handle as the stuff in the middleweight category like the Tenere 700. It was top heavy, the lack of low-end grunt on the road made me fear climbing would require way more precise throttle control. But I was genuinely incredibly surprised that as long as you had the strength to pick it up, the Himalayan 450 was genuinely one of the easiest bikes to control off-road. Despite the stock tires being utterly useless on anything gnarlier than hardpack because of regulatory requirements, the 21-inch front spoked wheels more than makes up for it. That and the suspension combined allowed me to roll over roots, berms and divots effortlessly without feeling any loss of control at all. And while the 17-inch rear was a slight problem in clearing obstacles, it would theoretically let users get more traction with wider and proper off-road tires. The Himalayan 450's 230mm of ground clearance and solid bash plate pretty much makes it at the upper echelons among ADV bikes across weight classes, nearly edging into dirt bike territory. To add on, my initial impressions of the eco riding mode was how redundant it was on a bike that already didn't feel like a tugboat at the lower revs. But once I tried using it on the trails, I realized it actually made riding off-road fast a lot easier. Riding off-road often meant bumps would knock your throttle hand, causing unexpected surges in power to the rear wheel that can throw you off the bike. But on the Himalayan, you almost never have to worry about that. You just pin the throttle and let the bike itself modulate your speed on the straightaways. If anything, this has been the easiest off-road machine I've ever had the pleasure to run with in my time as a rider. Lastly, for the performance section, I will talk about the fuel efficiency and range. Personally, I was getting around 22 kilometers per litre at the low end, using the performance ride mode, doing start-stop city traffic with the throttle pinned most of the time and mixing it with off-road. I could get around 27 kilometers per litre doing exclusively expressways with the eco mode on. This meant that the 17-litre tank would get you an absolute range of anywhere between 374 kilometers to 459 kilometers if you run it absolutely dry to the bone. For a 450 adventure motorcycle, that usually doesn't really come with many frills unless you are buying from a European brand like the KTM 390 Adventure. The Himalayan is surprisingly packed with more electronics than I expected. First of all, you get ride-by-wire for that light throttle action. Then you get a conveniently placed button by your right thumb to cycle through two ride modes, performance and eco, as well as to toggle the rear ABS on and off, which is superb for those out there riding more gnarly trails with inclines. However, you cannot change riding modes on the fly once you start the bike and move it. It has to be done with the ignition off for obvious reasons. The eco mode also sort of works like how most eco or rain modes work on other bikes. It mellows and flattens the power delivery instead of following your throttle position exclusively. Its ability to make fuel consumption economical is limited to optimizing acceleration, which is targeted more for city riders than any other application. The TFT display coupled with a left thumbstick is also a rather superb addition to the feature lineup. For once, it is far less complicated and more intuitive than most TFT dashes I've seen. I'm looking at you, BMW. It automatically switches between dark and light mode to match the ambient light around you for clarity if you set it so that way, and has so much more customizability to the interface to show you a lot of information pretty clearly, including your fuel mileage and a fuel gauge. With the associated Royal Enfield app, you are also able to get Bluetooth connectivity to your phone to receive turn-by-turn directions output directly to the dashboard itself, as well as be notified of incoming calls from the dashboard as well. Getting the app to connect to my iPhone 11 Pro was a relatively simple affair, though it wasn't really intuitive as to how to get it done without first going through the online manual. And lastly, to round out the long distance riding features, by your right index finger you also get a dedicated hazard light switch, as well as a solid rack to mount luggage options on. This section is possibly one of the biggest changes to the Himalayan between the 411 and 450. The 411 used to be one of the shortest adventure motorcycles by far, and for good reason beyond catering to short riders. The 800mm seat height on the original allowed any rider to flat foot off-road to handle terrain very specific to Southeast Asia and South Asia, where wet mud and clay tend to dominate, requiring a sit-down and tractor style of riding. The 450's seat height has now been increased to 825mm at the minimum. It's not much of a difference, I know, but depending on your inseam, the distance between your sole and the ground could be much greater. On top of that, the rider's seat itself is also adjustable by simply shifting two standoff bars underneath it to raise it up to 845mm if you prefer a higher seat. Or you could raise one or the other to angle your seat back and forth to your preference. A huge plus in my personal opinion. I have found that with my 177cm tall frame, the 845mm seat setting was just nice, suitable for riding on the roads. Then I pop it back down to the 825mm setting to tackle trails. Royal Enfield does offer an optional 805 to 825mm low seat in its catalogue, at least in India, to address the principal reason people wanted the original Himalayans to begin with. But it being an option instead of the standard may ruffle some feathers. The handlebars are relatively wide and comfortable to control the bike with for my height without making it impossible to split lanes with. The foot pegs themselves are also pretty wide with removable rubber inserts for off-road use. The wide pegs make it very easy to maintain your footing while standing up on the bike, and the teeth themselves are solidly grippy with proper footwear. Even the pillion seat and foot pegs feel pretty good for someone my own height in my personal opinion. While the pillion seat on the Himalayan isn't anything special, it is better than most stock pillion seats out in the market in terms of plushness and comfort. The standing posture for my height is extremely spot on. I didn't need to rotate the bars up from the way it was set up at the factory at all. I can fully extend my legs while keeping only that slight bend and remain loose at my elbows and wrists without being cramped up or stiffening them straight. For long distance riding, I think the Himalayan itself might need a bit of work. The small stock windshield is merely aesthetic, and the Himalayan's engine vibrates like a sex toy beyond 110 km per hour that requires some dampening at the handlebars and foot pegs to prevent numbness. Thankfully, the front fender and rear bodywork do much to keep mud and gunk away from you or your pillion and the rest of your radiator and engine. The stock mirrors are also pretty tiny relative to the bike's size. It is something that could be forgiven on smaller 125s, but I'd have appreciated something bigger on a bike this size so I don't have to wiggle my body around to get a good look behind me as much. The last thing to point out is that the side stand is angled in such a way that leans the Himalayan way over too much. I understand the logic behind it. The Himalayan is a lot more top heavy now, being 196 kilograms wet, and this prevents accidental tip overs. However, the Himalayan requires a lot more lateral parking space compared to many other bikes its size. It also makes pushing off from the side stand a lot harder than many comparable bikes of its size and weight. Probably one of the most divisive things to discuss about the new Himalayan is how it looks compared to the rest of the RE lineup, and most importantly of all, its 411 predecessor. Overall, the bike is just way more modern looking. Yes, it has retained a lot of the curves reminiscent of the R80 GS era of bikes, but it steps far out of the Royal Enfield's general aesthetic. Fans of the quote Royal Enfield look may be disappointed, but those that may want something closer to the 80s rather than the post-war period will probably be delighted. The mirrors and windshield may be functionally useless, but when paired with the duckbill fenders and round headlights up front, they give off a very rugged and woodcutter male in plaid shirts vibe. The crash bars that wrap the tank itself helps to break up the smooth curves to aid in that ruggedness when viewed from the side. The rear, however, drops the pretense of being a primitive machine and shows a far sleeker and modern appearance with a very neat and slim tail that holds a pair of integrated turn signals that doubles as brake lights, and the end can is kept small, compact, for a Jetson's idea of a futuristic bike. A lot of the engine mounting and exhaust routing is also superbly handled to keep it tight together to reduce wasted space, and the welding jobs, at least on the ones provided to me, is done very cleanly, particularly around the tank. Overall, when it comes to the metallic components on the bike, there is a lot of attention to detail, and the level of polish is superb for the price point. My only complaint is that the assembly of the hand controls could have been done better. Several of the switches and buttons are pretty loose and have too much free play. That includes the ignition switch, high beam switch, turn signal switch, and the left thumb joystick. I also don't personally like how loud the fuel injectors sound when they are getting primed. However, it's something very minor and I doubt most people would care. Also, while I may have given the integrated turn signals a glowing appraisal for its aesthetics, I still stand by the same verdict I handed the BMW 1300 GS on the same topic. I do not like this in general by virtue of it taking away the customer's choice to easily replace them with cheaper aftermarket replacement lights without tearing away and replacing the entire rear fender, especially for owners that intend to ride this off-road and will sooner or later smash their turn signals one way or the other. At $13,000 machine price in Singapore for the base trim that I found myself testing, the Himalayan 450 is way cheaper than other comparable lightweight ADV bikes available locally, like the $16,500 KTM 390 Adventure and the $29,800 BMW G310 GS that were both smaller displacement. Even the comparably sized Honda NX500 is expected to cost in excess of $17,500, and all while still providing better value as an off-road machine than every single one of the previously stated machines. One could even throw in an additional $900 for one of them fancy color schemes to get access to tubeless spoked rims as well for additional convenience and peace of mind on long solo road trips. In fact, while I am on this topic, the 2024 Himalayan 450 is bar none one of the best lightweight ADV bikes in the market in off-road capabilities. A beast that is only bested by the Honda CRF 300L Rally and the Kovi 450 Rally, both of which aren't even widely available in Singapore anyway. Anyone that buys one of these Himalayan 450s and doesn't use it primarily off-road like them GS Latte Papas are committing a serious crime against their own humanity. In my personal opinion, it exists literally for the sole reason of being your slow and steady Sherpa as you climb the actual Himalayas, both for experienced and even novice off-road riders. Seriously, just take the stock tires off straight away, sell it, or give it away, and just put on a pair of knobby shoes for it immediately. Beyond that, once outfitted with a proper windshield like the optional one from Royal Enfield and some solid handlebar weights, the Himalayan 450 is also a rather decent tourer with its range, adjustable seat, and straight line stability. Well, I hope my review was thorough enough to give you a good idea and enough information to help you make a proper decision whether the Himalayan 450 was a good piece of equipment to add to your stable. If you enjoyed this video, do remember to give me a like, subscribe, and take a look in the description down below and check out my merch store. Every single cent helps to keep this channel going, and I'll see you next time. Peace out. Bye bye.